In this presentation, I will be remote viewing the various cities on Venus and also alien bases. And I'm just going to describe how I did this remote viewing. I get impressions in my mind of various images and information about what I see. I don't do controlled remote viewing as per the military protocols. My remote viewing works differently. There's like various protocols for how to do controlled remote viewing, and it takes a lot of time and effort to do it, to sit down. It's very important. But for me, I just see something and a lot of information comes in right away, and I have to write it down and describe what I'm seeing in written form. I don't and when I was doing remote viewing initially, I wasn't looking to remote view Venus, not at all. I was focusing on Mars and the moon. But then I saw an image of a huge city structure, like towering, rising, very tall, and had this blue energy around it. And I also saw a circular, roundish type, bluish, silver gray base looking structure with some squarish, triangular outer buildings around it, part of the base location. And immediately I asked, what are these two places? And I got the target location that it's Venus, and that I needed to remote view it in more detail. So right away I went and did it, and I had no time to draw anything. I just clearly saw the imagery in my mind, and I just described the characteristics of what I was seeing and sensing and looking at when I went over Venus itself. In its present condition and in the past. So I wrote it all down as best as I could. And in my mind, I could already see what the cities look like, what the bases look like there. And I found exact imagery of it. And the imagery that I couldn't find, I had to find, I had to work on imagery. Like, I had to find some of the circular base images. Like, one I found a really good one, but the others I actually had to look for transparent images of the bases, and also the rough topography and where the bases were to further describe it. So I had to, and also the surface of Venus with some of the monuments that are on the surface. I had to kind of digitally create some of that on my own, because I couldn't find images of any of that. So it's quite interesting. I don't have a whiteboard with markers to draw stuff. Like, I see impressions and it stays in my mind, so I go with impressions. It's fast flashing impressions of what I see and hear and sense, so I write it all down, and I don't worry about so much imagery. It's in my mind, and then I look it up later. It's just, I get the pure telemetry data, and I go with it. So that's how my remote viewing works. It's like psychic impressions. It's not very controlled and scientific remote viewing. It's impressionistic. So I just wanted to describe that. before going into the detail of the remote viewing of Venus, of what I saw, sensed, felt while I was looking at Venus itself in its present and the past, and how it all ties in together. I didn't follow the strict set protocols of CRV, controlled remote viewing, so I'm just telling that here right now. I didn't do the strict protocols. It happens differently for me, and I actually found corroborating evidence of what I remote viewed on my own later on. There's interesting stuff there on Venus, so it's part of the presentation as well. So I did some research after my remote viewing. I actually did research on the target of Venus. And when you're setting targets for remote viewing, it's always a blind target, so you don't really know what you're looking at. And at first, when I saw the huge city Metropolis and the circular base, I didn't know it was Venus. So my target was blind because I didn't know what I was looking at. Then when I asked, the energy said Venus. So my target was truly blind in the beginning. But then I figured out what the target was, which is sometimes remote viewers can figure out that this is not terrestrial viewing. It could be another planet that you're remote viewing location-wise for a target. So that's kind of it's very a lot of information that I remote viewed, but I did do my due diligence and researched afterwards that there are maps of Venus with artificial looking structures on the surface. So I did do my research afterwards. Usually there's remote viewers who will remote view a target. They don't know the target they're remote viewing. They get a set of numbers and letters, sequence of 4 and 4, and they go and remote view the target. They're doing it blindly, so they don't know what the target is, but they get impressions of what the target is and they view it. But there are protocols for how to set up a target by a researcher. So there's image of the target, there's setting up stages. If there's something interesting on a planet, on a moon, Earth location, whatever, if there's something interesting and some beginning circumstantial evidence that a target is viable, the researcher sets that up, the parameters for the target of what it is, where it is. So it's research set up for a target, and then the remote viewers get the number sequence with letters or just numbers to focus in on the target and actually remote view it, to remote view the target. To provide verifiable evidence for the research stage of the target and put the information all together and see what the target is, where it is, was there any life there, the circumstances of the target, of the present and the past, how it all ties together. So that's very important information. Now, I didn't set up the target. I just went immediately into it. At first it was blind. It was done blindly for me. I had no idea it was Venus. I just had a large towering city with apartment blocks and one circular blue, silver, grayish base with outer buildings. That's all I had imagery of in my mind, and I just went with that, and it it ended up being a remote viewing session of Venus at the surface of the planet, so enjoy the presentation. The images that are in their presentation of remote viewing Venus, the impressions that I got from my mind at first. Later on, I looked on the internet to find the impressions that I had seen. So I would just like to state that all the images are not my own. They were found on the internet, and they're included in this presentation to represent the likenesses of what I had remote viewed. I am not a person who can draw well. I don't have a whiteboard, and I don't have markers. And I didn't even have time to roughly sketch what I was seeing. The impressions were coming so quickly of the cities and the bases and the ground topography on the surface of Venus. So I just jotted down descriptions, written description, and later on matched the visuals to that. The way my mind works is that after I remote view something or look at something in my mind, I will do search terms on the internet and match up to my written descriptions what I had seen in my mind in terms of visuals. And there's like 95.5 to 99% accuracy when I do that. And it's some kind of a psychic ability to do that and connect visuals with written information that I see in remote view. So that's what I did in this presentation. The models, the scales, the maps, the imagery, it all came from the internet domain. And that was put into the presentation. So thank you very much and enjoy the rest of it. Hi, it's Ileana here. I am going to discuss the process of how I remote viewed Venus and what's there. I was concentrating on just getting a sense of the various different alien bases and cities out in the Milky Way galaxy. That was my initial question. I wasn't focusing on Venus itself, but the first thing that appeared when I had asked the question of what type of alien bases and cities there are on various planets or moons in the Milky Way galaxy in our solar system, local solar system. And the impressions that I received was seeing this huge metropolis city with rising towers and rectangular squarish buildings that look like apartments. Seeing this huge city and then seeing other cities as well. I saw these circular type metallic blue grayish bases and a mountain view somewhere beside this base. There's a lot of energy beside the base. It's like glowing. And the cities were glowing as well, this bluish color. It had lights, so there was some kind of protective shielding around the cities and the bases. So I asked the question, where is this? Where is this huge city, and where is this circular type base? It's made of metallic, some kind of a metallic substance. And the answer was Venus. So I decided to investigate this further and explore looking at Venus to have a closer look. I wrote this information down, the initial telemetry data that I was getting about this huge city and the bluish gray circular squarish base that was overlooking the mountains. So, and also the base itself, there's metallic walkways. It's on a rocky, sandy, sloping area of some type, and I guess the sand or the dirt was covering the metallic walkways between the base. So that's the initial telemetry that I got from that. And I'm not able to draw anything. What I get when I remote view is I get images that are shown to me in my mind of what these places look like. And I write down the impressions of that. And right away, when I wrote everything down, I just got a calling to type in ancient alien bases on planets and cities. And when I typed this in as a search on Google, I immediately found the same two images that I was seeing in my mind when I was remote viewing Venus. So I saved those with the write-ups. But that wasn't it. There was a lot more info. I'm still getting impressions of all these cities on Venus. So, I wrote more down, and I'm going to further explain that. So going back to the bases, they're sort of circular, yet pyramid-shaped perhaps, metallic, glowing. And what I got was the blue-gray metallic bases are located on rocky and sandy terrain. In present time, some of the metallic walkways are covered in sand. Bases have been on Venus for a couple million years, and this is rough terrain type stuff. And the bases are not too far away from the cities. They're not very tall bases. They're metallic in nature, and there's a lot of energy inside. So I'm thinking they had some sort of experimental labs there for that. Very bright colors, some kind of protective shielding around that. And there's quite a few of these bases. And they're old, a couple of million years. Very advanced technology. So going back to the remote viewing of the cities on Venus and alien bases, the beginning keywords that were in my mind when the images of the towering city and the circular blue-gray bases that appeared in my mind, the keyword searches in my mind were ancient cities and alien bases on planets, large peaks, blocky rectangular shapes, blue colors, aura shielding Venus. Those were the remote viewing key terms that had appeared in my mind. So when I looked closer at these cities, because there's quite a lot of them on Venus, what came up was large towering metropolis cities, as well as apartment buildings on surface of Venus and circular metallic blue, silver, gray colored ancient bases. The cities have connecting tube tunnel subway maglev stations with supersonic trains. Some of the building structures are rectangular in shape, sort of boxy looking Others are roundish with sloping angles. These cities have water surrounding them, and some are inland based. This was a remote viewing of the past when Venus had water and a full breathable atmosphere. And the cities have huge towers, like huge towers. It's Metropolis cities. There is a blue-purple shielding glow around some of the larger cities and the base locations. The electromagnetic aura shielding protects against intense thermal heat blasts coming from the sun's core. There is still partial shielding around the cities even today in present time, looking at Venus. Most of the large cities are surrounded by mountain peaks and look out towards large bodies of water. This was in Venus's past. Currently, there is no water beside the cities. These cities are somewhat damaged from some type of a catastrophe that happened millions of years ago and damaged the planet's surface. Venus is very hot, but I sense there's still life on Venus. These cities can still be usable. Damage is minimal because of the shielding, so whatever happened, these cities are still there and intact. They could be habitable. They could be fixed and be habitable, and some of them, I get the sense that they still are habitable in some way by colonists on Venus. So I still sense that there's life there on the planet. Even though the atmosphere is almost non-existent, but there is somewhat of an atmosphere. It's not the same as it was millions of years ago when it was fully breathable atmosphere, but it's still there. So, and there's limited water. I sense there's water sources underground water. So there is water still, but not on the surface, underground. There are still mountain ranges on the surface where the bases are in some of the cities. So there's still mountain peaks. It's very interesting. I still sense there's life on Venus to this day. Something catastrophic happened, but colonists survived there and they're still there. I sense there's underground cities now that have similar shielding as the ones that are on the surface. They're not as large, but there's mostly underground cities now. But the cities on the surface, they're still used in some way for some type of habitation. It's limited on the surface, but they're still used as outposts, perhaps. They've been modified, but they're still usable and they are used for habitation of some sort. Because the subways, the tube tunnels are still intact. They're usable. There's not water anymore around the cities, but the cities have a purpose. So it's interesting. Very interesting. There's life there, and like I said, the cities are still usable, and some of them are habitable, as the shielding still works to protect from the heat of the sun. The shielding is still intact. It's partial, but it's still intact around the cities. Venus cities' infrastructure in the past. So the cities, the Metropolis cities on Venus, on the surface of the planet, they were smart cities with buildings built from crystalline tiles utilizing clean energy resources, so no pollution in the cities or on the planet. The cities were powered by kinetic energy power sources for all of the city energy uses and living resources within the cities. It was kinetic energy for the roadways, the highways, and they didn't have cars per se. It was more like hovercraft. The urban cities are interconnected gridway communication between other cities. So there's interconnected gridway communication in those cities. They had advanced technology used based on light emitting power sources. So everything had light emitting power. And from what I could see, there was a lot of solar energy paneling, something like type of that, to do this, and using crystalline technology as well. Roadways and highways are built from electromagnetic tiles with solar-powered components. As well, there's crystalline technology involved in this as well. From what I could see of this throughout the cities, and that's shown in the images. And again, there's a lot of tubeway transportation there for between the cities and in the cities themselves. So the tubeways are there for some type of fast speed trains. Very interesting. And that's in common in all of the cities. Here I will be describing the magnetic energy shielding over Venus cities that was built in the past. Magnetic energy shielding creates a type of force field around the cities so radiation, solar heat, and weapons attack cannot penetrate the cities or cause damage to infrastructure. The energy shields are powered by crystalline-based generators stationed on all sides of the cities. These generators are not very big. They are very discreet looking, so you don't almost see them in the cities. And they're eco-friendly, so they don't take up a lot of energy to make them work. Energy shields emit a blue-white color when fully activated, and that's what I was seeing around the cities and still seeing while remote viewing it. This blue-whitish aura-like color, gentle color. So that comes from the shielding, partial shielding around the city still being active even at this present time. Because the shielding emitters, they have almost the power source of that almost never ends. It's like an unlimitless power source, unlimited power source around the shielding. That's what I'm getting from that. That's why it's still partially active. It emits that blue-white color around the cities because the shields are partially active in protecting the cities, even though they were somewhat damaged during a huge kind of a cataclysm that happened. I'm getting that it was partially a natural cataclysm, partially man-made. So it was two factors that during the cataclysm something hit the shielding of these cities. Something hit the shielding, and partially disrupted the shielding frequencies. So the shielding is not at full capacity right now, but it still protected the cities. There was like some damage to the cities, but they're habitable. They could be lived in, they could be fixed. So thanks to that shielding protecting the cities. So living beings can leave the energy shielding areas at any time and return back to the cities. These energy shields do not block access to cities. So the shields don't block living being energies of living beings. So the colonists who used to live on the surface in these cities in Venus can come and go. The shielding would not prevent them from leaving or coming back to the cities. They could come back any time if they had left the city to other infrastructures on the planet or even underground. So it's the shielding was very complementary in the cities. It didn't lock you into the city. People can come and go as freely as they chose to. The magnetic energy shields can protect the cities from small meteorite impacts, but not from large asteroid or comet impacts, because that would damage the shield emitters and penetrate the cities. And I'm sensing that whatever catastrophes that happened on the surface of Venus, it wasn't huge to the point of damaging all the cities. It was just large enough that it stripped the atmospheric components on the surface of Venus. So it has very thin atmosphere. And it became very much hotter on the surface of Venus because of these catastrophes, partially man-made, partially natural. So whatever happened there, it affected the surface of Venus. Now that it has very thin atmosphere, it's much hotter than it used to be because it was a warm, hot climate before the catastrophes. Afterwards, it's a very hot climate right now there. So it's these shields around the cities also can control the temperature environments in the cities themselves. So these shields have the capacity to, energetic shields have the capacity to make it, to have breathing atmosphere in the cities even now, and to also protect from heat and radiation. So even though there's like almost no atmosphere on Venus right now, those cities, people could still live in those cities because the shielding protects the cities. So you have an atmosphere inside the shielding, and it controls radiation and temperature as well, parameters, these shields. So they're quite advanced. So that's what's causing the blue, whitish glow around the cities. Venus planet landscape in the past. There were oceans and lakes with rocky valleys in between, tall and large rising mountain peaks with spires, canyons with desert conditions, large bodies of continents with hot, warm climates. Some cities were built to resemble island structures on waterways. So it's quite interesting that in Venus's past, there was a lot of water and there were a lot of desert-like conditions there with mountains and spirals and peaks, kind of what we have here on Earth right now, with deserts and lakes and oceans and water. So that's what Venus had in its past. Although the mountain spires and peaks are a lot taller on Venus than Earth. It's hotter conditions there. So I'm just going to describe what I see as the inhabitants of Venus. The inhabitants on Venus have light to dark blue skin with dark brown hair. As well, there's a second race that has pale gray skin with white blonde hair. There's men and women. It's a humanoid species. They go up to 10 feet tall. Like I said, the people on Venus look humanoid. They wear robes, tunics. Women wear dresses. Men wear dress pants over tunics. They're colonists on Venus. It was their cities that were the towering cities and bases that were there. And they're still there. The colonists are still there on Venus. They survived, and they still, in some sort of a way, inhabitate the cities on the surface. They also live in underground cities, mostly, because the surface of Venus is hot. The atmosphere was stripped during the catastrophe, but there's still somewhat of a atmosphere left behind, so they can exist on the surface. They prefer mostly the underground cities, which have better shielding and are more secure from damage if there's catastrophes. So I get a sense that they're more comfortable underground in the underground cities. But the surface bases are still being used, and so are the cities. The cities are not as habitated as they were before in the prime of Venus in its past. They're still being habitable. Most of the colonists' populations are in the underground cities now. It's quite interesting. And they have the colonists have beautiful green, bluish eyes. Some of them have brown eyes. Their culture is advanced. Very advanced in technology and structures of just their culture itself. They're not a warlike species. They're very gentle, very knowledgeable in healing, in history. Yet they do know ways to protect themselves technologically, to protect their planet from being invaded. They do have that technology, that capability of protecting their planet, and even leaving their planet if need be to travel in space. They're still a spacefaring race. They do have ships and shuttles that leave the planet sometimes. Their cities are shielded, so you can't really see their activity of what they're doing. They're shielding to protect the planet. And they don't let in outsiders into their cultures very much. So that's interesting. So the surface of the planet, Venus, it has really huge man-made structures, like towers, huge towers. They have like obelisk sort of shapes, man-made structures, like livable structures, and it's all over the surface of the planet. So some of it is near craters. A lot of it is near mountain ranges and what used to be water in Venus's past. I sense that some of these structures aren't just cities, that there's some kind of monuments for spiritual type stuff that, that was culturally part of the colonists' way of life, more so in the past of Venus in its prime millions of years ago. So some of these structures aren't just cities, they're monuments of some sort. Also pieces of artwork, artifacts. Some of them look like obelisks or pyramid shaped, slightly pyramid shaped, but not like a standard triangular pyramid, more circular. And they're different colors as well. Some of them are like gray stone, some of them are glowing blue-gray, made of natural materials from the surface of Venus. Very interesting. I actually did a diagram of what this kind of looks like in the image that I'm describing. So I use the surface of Venus as it looks now, like barren without the water and stuff. I wanted to look as accurate as I possibly could make it in what I was seeing. So it's quite interesting. There's a lot of these monuments and structures all over the planet, not just cities and the bases. So, and it's still quite spiritual in what was left behind. Culturally, like there's a spiritual aspect to the colonists. Perhaps meditation, some type of solstice events. Just full of good energy and spirituality. Pure energy, like clean. Very interesting. So, after I finished remote viewing Venus and what I sensed was there, I actually wanted to see if there was anything on the internet about this stuff. If there's any maps of Venus and if anybody else looked into this. And I got a confirmation there was a few videos that people made actually studying studying maps of Venus that the Magellan telescope had imaged of Venus in the 1970s. So it's interesting. Somebody did actual scale models of how they interpreted what's there, and I'm including this in this presentation because that's the same stuff that I saw. So there's obelisk-like structures found in Venus craters. Now, I didn't see the obelisks or the pyramids in craters. I saw them near the cities, but apparently some of them were in craters. So when looking at radar images, it shows that there are obelisk-looking structures in craters and on the surface of Venus. As well, it looks like there are various square and rectangular multi-complex buildings with walled off sections that look like dwellings, apartments, etc. And that's what I saw in the large metropolis towering cities. They had towers, sloping towers, rectangular shapes that I assume are the apartments. Looks apartments, living spaces. So these are model projections of what the obelisk-like structures look like inside the craters. So that's a model depiction of another researcher, and I'm including it in this presentation because it ties in with what I remote viewed. It looks like the whole planet of Venus has different city buildings with large towers, as well as shorter buildings, large ones, and small ones on the surface of the planet. And that correlates with other images that I saw in my mind of these large cities. And I'm including those images as well in this presentation because obviously what I remote viewed is also corroborated in what others have seen. So I'm putting both my data in of my remote viewing telemetry with what the other researchers have seen and done scale models of this stuff. So it's quite interesting. And there's even a scale model of a large city with a lot of rectangular or square-shaped buildings. And it looks man-made. There's so many of these cities. They look man-made. They don't look like just mountains or volcanic peaks. So it's quite interesting stuff. Like I didn't see the obelisks or pyramids inside craters. I mostly saw them near the cities. But it's very interesting that somebody actually, when looking at the radar mappings of the Magellan telescope that's out in space that took images of Venus, the researchers saw that there's the obelisks inside craters, and it's depicted in the scale model. So that's very interesting to add to this data. So I'm going to describe some information about the structures found on Venus that a researcher actually looked at. And it just goes well with the information that I remote viewed. It just corroborates what I had seen. And this was after the fact of my remote viewing. I only looked this up on the internet after I had done my initial remote viewing. And I hadn't planned to actually look at Venus. I had planned to remote view Mars and the Moon. But Venus just came up as urgent and important to be remote viewed, so I did it. So here goes. Recently published images of Venus appear to show huge cities, artificial structures, and all kinds of elements, according to one researcher, Mundo Desconocido. He's a Spanish guy, a Spanish researcher who studies various maps of different planets and actually looks for man-made structures. So it said that artificial bizarre shapes appear to be cities and seem to have elements that emit light. It looks like there are great cities on Venus showing raised structures all over the planet that could be alien apartment complexes or just craters on the surface. So the fact that Mundo picked up on the maps that he looked at of Venus, that some of these structures or elements emit light was interesting, because when I did the remote viewing, I also saw energy being emitted from the cities and the bases, and it was glowing energy, like blue purplish energy, and it's shielding, it's protective shielding. So the fact that Mundo picked up on this is interesting. So it just corroborates my remote viewing data. And it also says the map image of Venus showing the large concentration of the artificial looking structures came from the Magellan probe that was shipped off to Venus in 1989, which arrived a little over a year later to collect data. Its mission was to study landforms and tectonics, impact processes, erosion, deposition, chemical processes, and the planet's interior. So that's interesting. So it wasn't actually 1970s, it was 1989. That's interesting. So I was off a little in my talk here, but that's okay. So it was 1989. And it says here also at least 85% of the surface of Venus was found to be covered with volcanic flows, which could explain the protruding structures referred to as huge cities by Mundo Desconocido. Maybe some of them are volcanic flows, but there's so many of these structures on the planet. It's cities. They just look too man-made with doors and squares and different angles that are usually man-made for apartments and large towers. So, it's man-made buildings. It looks like the entire surface of Venus might be covered in structures. And this is information that Mundo wrote about. And I just included a small portion of that in this presentation. And I actually put in the map, several angles of the map in this presentation after the remote viewing stuff. And what I see is roads, subway stations, highways to travel in the cities. So I see a lot of structural things in the map. There are some areas of volcanic flow that's not active anymore, but there's just too many man-made looking structures. And the fact that I sense life still on Venus, colonists, they're still there and the cities are habitable. So it's, but it's interesting. This information that came from Mundo Desconocido is very interesting. He actually published a YouTube video in 2016 about the scale models and how he viewed the Venus maps from the Magellan probe. And there's also radar telescopes from the Earth that also took images of Venus, which I'll talk about. So those also show structures of cities, the telescopes. So it's quite interesting. All of this really ties in together, and it's corroborating evidence for me of what I remote viewed. So, very good stuff. On this portion of the map of Venus, I see various large city areas and base locations. I see a lot of craters and circular type topography. It's very interesting, and it's just, I see structure here. I see a lot of structure, and not all of it looks like volcanic flow to me. It just looks very interesting and structural based, like man-made structural based. It's very interesting. So I thought I'd put that that map image in here, I see location, location, and location for structures. That's what I'm viewing. So, and it's very interesting. That's why it's here. It felt very important to me, this location. It has what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 5 cities there. Very interesting place, very energetic. So that's why I included it in this map. Very good stuff. Feel cities here and technology and bases as well near the cities. And roadways too. Connecting gridways of some sort for traveling between the cities, various cities, locations. So these images are basically what telescope radar from the Earth picked up of what Venus looks like. So it's radar images of the surface of planet Venus. Looks like cities are there. The areas that are darker in concentration of color, like in the middle of the planet, looks like there's circular structures and buildings there. And again, it looks like circular type buildings situated close to each other, as well as rectangular or square structures located in close vicinity. Looks like a city complex with storage facilities, roadways, homes, etc. There's a few of these types of cities found in the darker spots of the Venus geographical planetary locations. So I zoomed in on one of these cities to have a up closer look. It's very interesting, and I can see the structures. It's, for me, it's good confirmation of what I remote viewed. It's very important to have looked at that, because that's what I was seeing in the remote viewing telemetry. A lot of cities and structures, a lot of different connections between the cities, travel-wise as well. A lot of connection, like roadways, tunnels, subways, maglevs, very intricate and technologically advanced cities and habitable areas. So here we have another radar image of the surface of Venus, and surface topography of the planet Venus shows interesting characteristics. Man-made structures like cities, roadways, subway stations. There are signs of about 12 cities from the various map images. As well, there are bases which have sublight technology for testing planetary-wide cycle terraformation equipment. This is where the planetary surface can be transformed in order to return oxygen levels to create a new fully breathable atmosphere through bioliving particles released from light ray beam systems. Now, this portion of the information is something that I picked up on when remote viewing. I just picked up this information from the basis when I looked inside the bases. The blue, silver, grayish bases, they have that terraforming technology inside of the basis. They were doing research about it. They have the technology, so they were planning some type of terraformation projects before the catastrophe happened. And that technology is still there in the basis, and it can be usable to do the terraforming at some point. And when I was doing the remote viewing, when I was looking at the cities, I saw about 12 of the cities, the bigger ones, the Metropolis cities. And I see it on the map as well, on the radar map, so it's interesting. Venus is certainly an interesting planet to have remote viewed. I find it fascinating. So again, advanced technology there. So here's another map, and this looks like potential highways and roads between various different cities. So there's a lot of rough edges and stuff, a lot of terracing, I would say, like terracing and terrain that was used as roadways. That's what it looks like to me. It's rough edges, and these roads are probably damaged now because of what happened in the catastrophe. So I don't get the sense that the roadways are being used anymore so much for travel. They haven't been, there's no upkeep on them. So some of them are damaged. It's mostly traveling in the underground cities now. They have traveling infrastructure there, tunnels, systems for travel, electromagnetic, gravitic travel, maglev, even better than maglev now, technology, but the surface roadways and highways aren't being used anymore for surface travel. But they're still there. Some of it is somewhat intact, most of it is damaged, but it's still there. So that's interesting. This map shows a lot of white area on it, and it looks very concentrated geographically. This to me looks like one of the bigger cities, possibly 3 to 4 cities clustered together with some roadways and stuff. So I see a huge city metropolis with apartments and living infrastructure. And it's more than one city linked together, like 3 to 4 cities somehow linked together, combined in infrastructure. So I thought I'd put this in as well, because when I remote viewed this, to me it looks, when it was in its prime in the past, it was heavily populated. There was a lot of people living there in the past. Not now, but in the past. So it was pretty important. Like, there were 3 to 4 cities there in that clustered area on the map. So it was very important on the planet. It was very habitated. It was a huge metropolis area. A lot of towers, a lot of homes, apartments, travel there. It was all interconnected, grid-wise. So it was a very important place in the past. It's like one of the central metropolises on the planet. It is like a core hub for activity of people meeting and living there, and businesses, and a lot of energy, a lot of life that was there in the past. Now the cities are still there, and it can be made to be habitable again, but the purpose of strong habitation is not there anymore in the present. It was present in the past. Now the focus is more on the underground cities. But again, this is still very important. These cities are very important. So it's quite vital to Venus. It was a central hub of activity there in those 3 to 4 cities in the past. And archaeological record, very important now in terms of history for Venus. There's still importance there, some importance. So it's the shielding is still there. Partial shielding for these 3 to 4 cities is just doesn't have the same purpose of habitation, more like outposts. Very interesting. And so that concludes my presentation of my remote viewing of Venus, and also the other research study data that Mundo had done in his research into the structures of Venus. So thank you very much.